I want to start today with a powerful idea from the opening of your new book, Unstuck. And you say, while the word stuck is not a clinical term or a diagnosis, it is central in almost all psychological conditions. What do you mean exactly by stuck, and how does this kind of show up, and why is it such a universal human experience?
In many ways, it's universal because pain is universal, and it is our struggle with pain that will leave us really stuck. So you're absolutely right. You know, in all the work that I do, regardless of diagnosis or history or presentation, usually the reason that people are here are seeking help is because they are stuck in certain patterns, stuck in ways of being, stuck in their minds, or stuck in patterns often of avoidance. So it's kind of this common thread that runs through almost all presentations that I would see in my practice, and that also I know from an evidence-based point of view. And I think in some ways it can be helpful to step down from that clinical presentation sometimes and just to look at actually what unites us, and that is that here we are stuck in this way of functioning at this moment. That
experience of being stuck, what does that look like or feel like? How might that present?
Yeah. So, you know, it presents in a myriad of ways. And for some people, it can look, you know, like a very concrete way of being stuck. So I'm stuck in my job. I'm stuck in a relationship. I'm stuck making decisions. But also it can present in a much more, I suppose, nuanced way. So it might look like getting really stuck in our thoughts, and our thoughts really driving, particularly critical judgmental thoughts, driving our choices of behaviour or actions. We might also feel really stuck with respect to taking action. So this kind of sense of immobility, not being able to move, feeling very paralysed. It, like I said before, it will present itself in some way or another in almost all clinical presentations. So, you know, in anxiety, we're getting really caught up, for example, in those sensations that might be occurring in the body, or we might be getting really caught up in all these kind of predictions that the mind's making about what will happen in the future.
Yeah, it does. So what I'm hearing is that stuck is kind of an umbrella term. It can describe a myriad of different circumstances and experiences that someone may feel. It also kind of seems like something that all of us might experience to some extent and is a bit of a spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, you know, I've experienced being stuck, and, you know, despite, you know, all the knowledge that I have, I will get stuck again. And I think that this is, I think this kind of bears witness to, in some ways, that being stuck and the quality of stuckness is absolutely part of being human, because struggling is a quality of being human. So we will get stuck, and we will get stuck again. I guess for me, the invitation that we all have is to notice, first of all, that we're stuck, and then to look at, okay, so what do I do now?
Awareness, which I'm sure will be a big theme of this episode. I enjoyed your feature of Jon Kabat-Zinn, so I'm hoping we go there. So in your clinical experience, in sitting with so many people in moments of pain who are suffering, who are stuck to varying degrees, what have you noticed that distinguishes those who stay stuck versus those who can move forward?
This is a hard concept to almost quantify, but for me, it's a willingness, and it's a willingness to feel, which is what will move us out of a place of being stuck. So often, what keeps us stuck is an unwillingness to have unpleasant thoughts and feelings and sensations in the body. So that would be, you know, a very common quality or characteristics that will keep us stuck. And that goes hand in hand with what's called experiential avoidance, which is our tendency or our desire to avoid any unwanted internal experiences.
Is there a a difference or a notable difference in the kind of prevalence of presenting in this way between men and women? You mentioned willingness to feel, and I know this is a generalization, but certainly, speaking from my N=1 experience, looking at my brother and my friends, the men in my life seem to be less willing, I guess, to feel, or perhaps don't have the skills or experience in feeling, and have kind of been socialized to suppress vulnerability and avoid emotional expression. Am I just projecting this out to the world, or does this kind of feeling of being stuck show up more for young men?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I don't know whether that being stuck is more common in men than women, but certainly the research would attest to this idea that there may be less emotional literacy historically, where there is a gender difference there. And so, Simon, even anecdotally, when you talk about, amongst your male friends, this experience of being able to label and name emotion may be different because of our experience of socialization. And particularly if we look at those early childhood messages that boys probably of like a millennial generation and beyond that have experienced. Boys don't cry, suck it up, get on with it, just keep going, don't worry about it. So that kind of cultural message there, what it does is, yes, it might keep you moving, but it actually takes you away from this capacity to tune in to what the emotional experience is. So yes, absolutely. I might see clients, males in my office who actually don't have a language for emotion. It tends to be limited to things like, I feel really bad, I feel crap, or I feel good. And there's a real danger of having a very limited emotional vocabulary.
I want to put a pin in that and come back to that for those who may be listening and thinking, I'm willing to feel, I'm just not sure where to start. You also write at the beginning of the book, you write that whatever your mind says, whatever experiences you've had in the past, there is nothing about you that is broken, stuck maybe, but never broken. And I read that and I was like, wow, it's a very compassionate reframe. Can you unpack for us, like, why does that distinction matter here?
Yeah, it matters so much, and it matters deeply to me in the work that I do. So often I will have people come in, and even, beyond my practice, I know that this is a common experience, that we feel so broken. The problem with broken is that it innately requires fixing. And often that can feel like someone else needs to fix me. I'm not able to do this myself. And there are a number of real struggles that come with that, but also fundamentally, we can't fix pain because pain is part of us being human. And so the notion that I'm broken because I'm having these feelings or because I'm having these struggles is actually not particularly helpful. So this reframe here becomes, I think, a very powerful starting point often, and that is that there is nothing broken about you. You're stuck in certain patterns and you're stuck in this struggle. And what is so empowering, I think, about stuckness is that being stuck can be, if we're willing, temporary, rather than the finality of a brokenness, for example.
So we can't fix pain, but we can fix or change our relationship to it.
Yes, absolutely. That's really kind of key and fundamental. And the approach that I use, if it hasn't stood out already, is based on an acceptance and commitment therapy approach, which is an evidence-based, very well-researched area of therapy. And, it very much comes with this idea that historically we have often worked really hard to very much get rid of symptoms and get rid of unpleasant experiences. And what this particular approach really emphasizes is actually, if we get rid of pain, we actually lose a lot of our functioning and a lot of our lives. So in some ways, it's like pain will show up in places that we care. So, a really common example might be that I feel a deep sadness that this relationship has ended. Now, if this sadness wasn't there, it would tell me that you hadn't cared about that relationship. And so there's something so incredibly functional and important about the presence of that pain. And instead of trying to get rid of it, what we're working towards is actually changing how we relate to that experience so that it's maybe not pushing us around so much and we can kind of live alongside it so that it's not sitting in the driver's seat and in fact it's sitting in our passenger seat.
Yeah, the pain being symbolic of something that we care about deeply, something that we value. Actually, it reminds me of a recent episode I had my friend Drew Harrisberg on, who's been on a bunch, and he was speaking about the grief he's experienced with his dog passing. And by the end of us speaking about that, we really had zoomed in on the grief very much represented how much he valued his relationship with Dennis, his dog.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's so interesting that there's a whole aside there to how we can often really discard or minimize the grief around the loss of pets. That's a whole other thing. But it represents attachment. And it represents, like, this grief that's here represents the fact that we cared so deeply and we loved this person or this thing or this pet so much. And so that's such useful information. It's then how we work with that feeling that I think is our next challenge.
You write that psychological flexibility is the key, or one of the keys to becoming unstuck. What does that mean, psychological flexibility, and how can we begin to build it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think, just putting it very concretely, psychological flexibility is the same as us having flexibility in our body. So if we are really stiff and immobile in the body, our movements will be limited, our movements will be more difficult, we may be more prone to injury. And so when we become more flexible in the body, we're actually able to move and adapt to our environment much more readily. And the same principle applies to our cognitive skills and our ability to work with unpleasant emotions and sensations in the body. And it sits at the heart of great psychological functioning. If we can be more flexible with our responses to experience, we will be much more likely to experience significant well-being. And so to just be really specific about that, it's a little bit like if I am really hooked into an unpleasant thought that I'm a failure or that I can't do this. If I was being what's called psychologically rigid, I would hold really tightly to that thought, and that thought would drive my behavior. So, for example, if I have this thought, I'm a failure, it might mean that I'm not going to put my hand up for a promotion. I'm not going to take a risk to try the next thing. And so we hold very tightly to this thought as though it's a fact. And it gives us very little space to be able to see alternative viewpoints. From an ACT perspective, what we would do is actually zoom out and see that this is a thought that is passing through the mind, and we can choose whether we pay attention to this or whether we let it pass by. So psychological flexibility really is this capacity to have a much broader lens through which we view our experiences. That they don't have to be happening to us. We can observe them and take a step back from them.
When you say ACT perspective, if someone's not familiar with that, what does that mean?
So that's acceptance and commitment therapy. It's the acronym that is commonly used rather than explaining the whole thing. But yes, that an ACT approach very much holds psychological flexibility at its core, really.
Okay. And that's something that has been studied in psychological sciences?
Yeah. Yeah, there's an immense amount of research, much like many other therapeutic approaches, but this one in particular, presence of many randomized controlled design studies. We know that it is effective, and we know that that people do respond very readily to this particular approach.
How would this, I guess, compare at a very high level or stack up against some of the other approaches that people might see out there or have tried?
Yeah, I mean, it is very much considered a gold star approach to treatment. So it's it's really akin to, for example, cognitive behavioural therapy or CBT, and in addition to many other approaches. But certainly, for me, I've noticed anecdotally in my practice amongst my colleagues that it is a very helpful approach, and it's certainly backed by the research.
So for someone like me who's coming from nutrition science, so I'm a long way away from my expertise right now, what would be the distinction between cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think I've certainly heard of and a lot of people have probably experienced or heard of, and ACT?
There, in some ways, ACT is drawn from behavioral science in particular, and there are very many common features to both approaches. One of the fundamental differences, so in CBT, one of the main processes or approaches is to really take a look at our thoughts and to find other ways to think about our negative thoughts, for example. So a very common approach would be to identify our negative automatic thoughts, to take those thoughts and to then come up with some alternative beliefs. So we're really trying to change the core belief to come up with more helpful beliefs, perhaps. And sometimes that involves challenging our negative thoughts to be true or false. Now, in ACT, we actually take an enormously different approach to our thinking in particular. And that is that instead of changing the thoughts, we're changing how we relate to them. So what that means, if I have this thought today, for example, I can't do this. Now, when that thought shows up from a CBT point of view, we might develop a whole lot of other thoughts like, yes, you can. History would show that you've done this before. You can definitely do this. However, sometimes what we notice is that when we speak back to our thoughts, sometimes the negative thoughts actually get stronger.
You're drawing awareness to them and giving them airtime, essentially.
Yeah, and in fact, if we think of it like this inner critic that's coming in and having a lot to say, if I say to my inner critic, you can do this, the inner critic is very often likely to stand up and say, what are you talking about? I can't do this. And so it's almost as though that kind of internal dialogue, these positive thoughts kind of coming in, actually almost exacerbates or strengthens that inner critic. And then we're caught in this battle between almost like the good angel and the devil that sits on the shoulder. And that gets us caught in this struggle, which actually is a really tough place to be.
I've been using Shopify for over 15 years now, starting with my first online store back in 2008. Since then, I've built multiple businesses on this platform, including 38 Terra, the gut health supplement brand founded by Dr. Will Bolsowitz. Shopify has been the backbone of every brand that I've launched, helping turn ideas into real, thriving businesses that reach customers across the world. And honestly, Shopify has afforded me a lifestyle that I could have never dreamed of and made it possible for me to pursue the proof, this show, as a passion project instead of something that I needed to make super profitable. Shopify powers millions of businesses globally and accounts for 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. From brands like Mattel and Gymshark to founders launching their first product. Want to build a stunning online store? Shopify gives you hundreds of beautiful templates that match your brand's vibe. No designer needed. Need to move fast? Shopify's AI tools help write product descriptions, craft headlines, and enhance product images, saving you hours. And when it's time to grow, you've got built-in tools for email and social media marketing that make it feel like you have a huge team behind you, even if it's just you. From inventory and payments to international shipping and returns, Shopify takes care of the heavy lifting. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your business idea into your first sale with Shopify on your side. Start your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/proof, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/proof to start building your business the smart way. Got you. That's a really interesting distinction. So versus what you're talking about is not really engaging with the inner critic. It's just non-judgmentally observing the thoughts you're having. And then where do you go from there?
Yeah. So that is a fundamental aspect of this is tuning in and bringing awareness to like what's called the tape in the mind. So we have this observing skill that I can notice I'm having thoughts and therefore I am not my thoughts. It's a little bit like, I don't know, Simon, back in the day, if you ever went to Melbourne Zoo, there was a tiger exhibit, and in the tiger exhibit, it was pretty small back in those days, and the tiger would just pace up and down the enclosure. That's a little bit like us getting caught up in thoughts. So it's like we're just pacing up and down, like this relentless rumination of like back and forward, back and forward. With ACT, it's a little bit like we're actually the observer of the tiger. So we're sitting on the other side of the glass and we can see this tiger moving up and down. And that's the skill or the process that we're practicing in ACT, is that we're actually becoming the observer of our thoughts rather than being the tiger. And it's with that observing skill we then get a choice. So one of the most common, this is a very quintessential practice that we would do in ACT, and that's basically using the phrase, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that.
Gotcha. So you create some distance from it.
Yeah. So if I'm having the thought, I can't do this, if I hold that really tightly for myself now, so I can't do this, and then I take a breath and I go, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that I can't do this. How does that change the lens through which we view that thought? So it offers us a space. It offers us a space now to notice everything else that's happening in this moment. And it kind of gives us a question. Do I want to pay attention to this and let it drive my behavior? Or can I do something else now? Like, can I step into feeling how that feels to have that thought? So can I tune into the emotions? Can I let them be? Or can I take action that would be really in line with what I value? Or can I take action that would be really like serving my needs in this moment?
All right. So the things that are landing for me, and I'll throw them back to you. You can tell me if I'm a good student right now, which is one of my things actually, showing up right now, always trying to look good and look polished. we can dig into that. Trace that back to when I was a kid. But what I'm hearing is that we have a choice. So it would follow, or at least I would assume, that often if we're feeling really, really stuck, it feels like we don't have a choice. But in many instances, if we slow it down, like you said, and create some distance between the thoughts that are running through our mind and us, we can create a space where we have a choice.
And that what I really want to add in there is that we may not have a choice about our external circumstances. So there are so many conditions that we just don't have a choice about. We don't have a choice as to whether we have like a physical illness or a disability, or we're a carer, or we have abject poverty, for example. So there are many circumstances where we don't have control over our actual environment. But what we do have a choice around is how we relate to the inner workings of our minds, and how we care for our bodies, and how we care for the feelings that are showing up. That's the space of choice there. And then, yes, that can direct action within the environment that we're living.
In your book, you mentioned that some of these, I guess, ways of thinking, or psychological rigidity, I think is the term you used in the book, which can contribute to us if getting stuck, feeling like we don't have choice, are often things that protected us earlier in life. Can you unpack that? Why it is that we might be running some of these patterns?
Sometimes it can sound like an enormous therapy cliche that we go back to childhood. but it really kind of sits at the heart, obviously, and the foundation of who we are as humans. How is it that we experienced our environments and our primary caregivers when we were children? I think in relation to what might have been helpful then and maybe now what's not serving us is this acknowledgement that as kids, we are trying our best, absolute best, to navigate the environment to get our needs met. And so we may develop particular thoughts or beliefs that during that period of time were really adaptive. So, for example, one of the things I often see, this is not even a clinical thing, but often a presentation of people pleasing. Now, that people pleasing behavior might look like I must ensure that everyone else is happy before myself. I must show up and meet the needs of other people. I also need to avoid conflict. Now, as a child, so it may be, and that's a very, very common experience. That conflict feels so unpleasant, and there may be many reasons in childhood as to why that's the case. For some people, like the origins of self-sacrifice or people pleasing may exist within, for example, a really harmful or neglectful or abusive family home. And so it actually really served that child to be people-pleasing in order to avoid harm or danger to themselves, as an example. On the other end of the spectrum, there may have been in the family home these beliefs and norms that kindness is idealized. And so that we get this repeated message here that other people's needs are paramount, and that we need to ensure that we're being kind to other people. And so we can form this belief in here that I need to please others to be lovable. I need to please others to ensure that there's no conflict. I need to please others to really kind of in some ways get our needs met. And so at that time, we can absolutely see that holding those beliefs, for example, were really adaptive. So they helped us navigate that environment in the most effective way. What we notice, though, often is that when we emerge through adolescence and into adulthood, is often holding tightly onto those beliefs aren't serving us anymore. It's like we've kind of outgrown the armor that was there to protect us at the start. And now it's actually just keeping us really stuck.
There's a lot that you just said there that's resonating with me and no doubt many of the listeners. I think my biggest learning in my 30s has been that it's okay not to be okay. I don't have to be this super polished, perfect, have all my stuff together man. And in what I realize in hindsight and also through changing behavior now is that showing up as that perfectly polished version of myself was holding me back massively in relationships.
How did you notice that?
Well, I was guarded and I wouldn't, none of us are perfect, right? And I would be trying to maintain this kind of, I'm this guy that has everything together kind of persona. And so I'm not letting people into my real human experience that I'm having, firstly. And because I'm doing that, I'm not giving them permission to also open up to me about what they're experiencing. So I'm ending up having more surface level relationships with, like, for example, my best friends who I absolutely love. And we've been able to deepen those relationships a lot, but it's taken hard work, and it's taken a kind of redefinition, I would say, as to what it means to be a man. And I can say, though, that those relationships have certainly gone to deeper and deeper levels the more I've lent into being able to like tap into my heart and not my head, basically.
That's such a great distinction, absolutely. But I think it can feel really risky, right? Like that holding that, like, for example, with perfectionism or holding, this sense that I have to be perfect, again, that may have really served a very important function at some point in time. And this idea of like letting that go of of not preparing, like over and above what you need to do, for example, can feel so risky. To not present to others that I'm feeling like I'm not feeling fine is a very risky feeling.
Yeah, you're risking, not looking good. You're risking being messy. You're risking judgment. But on the other side of that is greater understanding.
Yeah. And it's not only that, I think it's this sense of authenticity that I am, that I'm really actually honoring the parts of me that I've held back for so long. And the parts that want to speak up, the parts that want to be seen and heard and all that stuff. So it's, if we can let go of some of those rules almost, it opens us up to more choice and to greater freedom. Yes, pain might come along with that. But it's kind of like, as Susan David, psychologist and researcher, says, it's the price of admission to a meaningful life. And I always hold that kind of really close to my heart, that if this pain is here, I'm kind of on track in some way.
In your book, you talk about there being a couple of main barriers to building psychological flexibility. One, we've spoken about kind of believing everything our mind says. I think you use the term cognitive fusion for that. And then running from our pain. So avoidance. How do we become more discerning with our thoughts? So you've spoken about awareness, but what's the key to really separating those thoughts that we're having that are serving us versus those that are not?
Yes, absolutely. Awareness is fundamental in this kind of process. And then, when we have this awareness, we can actually really take a look at the thoughts. So we can look at what's called their workability. So how are these thoughts working for me? And what comes along with that is really an attunement to our values. And that if our values represent like our internal compass, and if we imagine, for example, that heading west is the direction that we want to head, our values guide us there. And so when it comes to our thoughts, this kind of question that we might be asking ourselves is, if I hold tightly to this thought, does this bring me closer to my values? If I believe this thought to be true, does it create a greater sense of meaning and purpose for me? Or does it keep me stuck? And does it keep me protected maybe from pain? That's a very common one. So we look at how these thoughts actually work for us and whether they're serving us in the long term to kind of create this life that's worth living. Now, for example, if we hold a thought that, I don't know, that my partner's always to blame. It's always my partner's fault. That's not an uncommon one, or the reverse. Now, if I hold really tightly to that and I'm unwilling to have some flexibility in that thought, it might mean that I now only pay attention to when they're doing things that are annoying me. Or I may only pay attention to that story in there that they're the one doing the thing that's causing us to have relationship difficulties, for example. So from an ACT point of view, if we were to pick up this thought and to notice it, first of all, yes, so I'm having this thought, it's their fault. If we pause long enough and we can ask ourselves, okay, so if I hold on to this thought, does this bring me closer to my valued direction or does it move me further away? Then we get a choice. Okay, so it's almost like, can I get a bit of wiggle room around this thought? What if that thought's not true all the time? What if there's actually some more nuance in that generalization that we've given that thought? So maybe, yes, we can see that, okay, yeah, my partner has some stuff to work on and we can acknowledge that. But also, is there something I can be doing differently? So it's really opening up to this, again, like this greater lens through which we can view our experience. The way that I often like to think about it is, I don't know if you had this experience, Simon, but growing up, we would sit around a dinner table I had two brothers, so we were a family of five. And we would sit around our dinner table and we would sit always in exactly the same spot. So everyone had their seat. And so therefore, I always had the same view. It was always the same viewpoint from that seat. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, from a eating dinner point of view. But if I was to change seats, a whole different view would open up. The table is still the same, but my view of the table is different. And this is kind of what we're looking at with our thoughts. So if I hold this thought that it's my partner's fault, this is the only view I get of that thought. But if I was to open up and change the perspective, I open up to a broader view. Now, it may be that in this example, that perhaps there are some really significant things that are happening in your relationship that you really need to consider, and it's my partner's fault may be really important information. But on the other hand, it might also bring awareness of how I'm contributing to this pattern here and what else is happening.
Yeah, I'm hearing a conversation, at least in this example, around blame versus responsibility. Is that something that comes up quite a bit in clinic for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so interesting you say that. So the blaming piece often comes from real hurt. You know, that when we're really hurting, of course we may look for a reason and for someone else to have done this to us. And in many instances, that may very well be the case. But also, like if we were to open up to seeing that person as another human who also suffers, who also has their own struggles, does this change how strongly we hold on to the blame towards the other?
So that's where it comes back to your values, because if you value something like curiosity or empathy, understanding, that's going to lend itself nicely to being more flexible and potentially being able to develop or reach that perspective you just mentioned.
Absolutely. And so they're pretty kind of key ingredients in some ways, kind of this openness, empathy, curiosity, even a kindness or compassion can lend itself to that as well. But even if you don't hold those values, because we don't have to, obviously, values are very, very chosen and unique to us. Even if you didn't hold those values, we can still have the skill and the practice of curiosity. So you may not hold it as like your most fundamental value, but we can still practice it with that being in service of other values. So me leaning into a curiosity is not only leaning into the curiosity about the other person's experience, but also leaning into the curiosity about what are these patterns here for me? And often with the blaming one, there may be a history of this being a common experience, that when difficult things arise, my default mode may be to blame others because that will make me feel in some ways better. But when we start to uncover that, okay, so here is a pattern and how has that pattern served me? Maybe there are actually other ways of viewing this situation that may actually be more helpful to me in the long term.
A little while back, I recorded an episode diving into the health benefits around Bragg apple cider vinegar to review the science before endorsing a product that I've personally used for years. After that episode and a great chat with the Bragg team, here's what stood out. There is definitely some confusion online. Is Bragg still organic? Has it been pasteurized? The answer, it is not pasteurized. Bragg apple cider vinegar is 100% organic. It is raw, unfiltered, and naturally fermented with the live culture or mother in every bottle. In addition to being USDA organic certified, Bragg apple cider vinegar is non-GMO, project verified, kosher, B Corp certified, made in the USA, and free from added sugars, preservatives, or artificial colors. Fair to say, this little apple cider vinegar has plenty to brag about. Plus, there are real wellness benefits that come with its 750 milligrams of acetic acid per serving. Acetic acid has been proven to improve post-meal blood glucose by supporting glucose uptake, particularly in people who have elevated blood sugar. As I wrote about in my book, I'm a huge fan, and I mean huge fan, of a daily salad for long-term brain health. And for flavor and function, I recommend dressing it with Bragg apple cider vinegar, garlic, salt, pepper, Dijon mustard, and olive oil. Head to bragg.com and use the code Simon for 20% off your first order. That's bragg.com, promo code Simon. Can you share with us your health experience journey over the last few years, if you don't mind? I thought that was a really important part of your book, and I know that it directly related to your personal clarity on your own values.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2021, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, early stages breast cancer, and at that time, I have 2 kids, and they were really little, and that prior to that, I had never had any health concerns at all. I had always been very, very healthy, and that moment, it will stay with me. I'm sure with many other memories, but that will stay with me in such a profound way. It's as though, like, with that diagnosis and with the uncertainty around what that will look like, kind of in the early stages of understanding, stages and investigations, it will stand out to me as this moment of so deeply yearning to be in this world. And I remember so vividly, like, there's something about, I live in Perth, and the sky is always blue, but it felt like the sky was so blue, it was almost excruciatingly beautiful. And it was almost like this moment here of, I do not want to leave this planet. And I had so many moments like that where everything that I deeply cared about felt like it was in, like, high definition. So it really, like, that period of time, and since that period of time, it has just acted as such a kind of like a call to arms almost around how I want to live, and most importantly, to be fair, that the most important thing to me is leaving this earth with the people that are in my life, to know that they were deeply loved by me. That was kind of this kind of fundamental thing that showed up, is that I just want people to know that I love them. And that continues to be such a guiding force that sits with me, much like a compass, like I said before.
For folks who haven't been through a kind of health scare like that, where all of a sudden you're questioning mortality, you're realizing that life is finite, and it's, you're kind of forced to looking at what are the most important aspects of life, and they come to the surface. For folks that haven't been in that position, and they're not sure what their values are, it hasn't crystallized for them, what's that process look like?
Yes, so absolutely, we don't want to have to be exposed to near-death experiences to get clear on what we value. It's really fundamental, in my opinion. So it's one of the first things, many of the first things that I would do in this work, because values really do act as our compass. So there are a multitude of ways in which we can uncover what we value. From a really concrete point of view, you can go out and Google a values questionnaire, and that can be a starting point. I certainly have one in my book that's based on the work of Russ Harris, who's an author and therapist, and also a medical doctor. And so there's this great questionnaire that allows you just to synthesize the values that stand out to you as being important. That's a great place to start. You can also Google many other ones as well, I'm sure. What I like to do, though, to kind of really expand a little bit more on that, are a couple of exercises that get you thinking about, again, like how you want to live, how you want to show up in this world. And a very quintessential exercise would be what's called the 80th birthday exercise. And, we can really choose any kind of milestone event, really. But the invitation is to imagine that it's your 80th birthday. And at this birthday party, you have all the people that you love in your life there. And those people can be alive or dead. They can be imagined, not real. So you kind of create in your mind this particular image. And then it comes time for speeches, and you invite 1, 2, 3 people to stand up and to speak about what you've meant to them. And in these speeches, as you listen, you notice what it is that they're saying about how it is that you've lived in this world, what it is that you've meant to them, how it is that you've shown up. And from there, we kind of, in that process, often it brings up quite a lot of emotion often. And it brings up emotion for lots of reasons. One of those reasons can be that it might feel like I'm not living that way at the moment, and there's a great amount of pain that comes with that, a sadness or a sorrow or a grief even. But often it can really highlight and shine a light upon the fact that we're not looking for achievements. So we're actually looking for how we lived rather than what we did. If that kind of makes sense. And so from that process, we can really start to glean, okay, so perhaps I value, in those speeches, I might have valued, what might come out for me is that I've valued caring, compassion, curiosity, for example. For other people, it might be other things like being industrious or being creative. It doesn't have to just be like the ones that we would say like the nice values. But we're looking at a quality of behavior rather than the actual, the outcome per se.
So if you do that exercise and it hurts, it feels uncomfortable because it feels like there's a gap. So between where you want to be and doing an honest audit where you are today, right? And, to some extent, that's going to affect all of us to varying extents, I'm sure. But if you notice that there is a gap, is that's a sign that your actions or behaviors are not aligned with your values.
Yeah, exactly. So we can kind of see there's so many instances of this that if your values are like heading west, your actions might be heading east. But that does not mean that you value this west direction any less. It's just that the actions and behaviors aren't aligned. So, whenever we uncover this, and to be honest, in therapy, usually there is a gap. That's why we're often there, because there is this pain that sits there, that I'm not living the life that I want to live or not cultivating the kind of relationships or life that I want. So there is this gap here. And what we look at is, okay, so what's getting in the way? What is really getting in the way of this action here? And it might be really, in some ways they can be really simple things, like maybe you really value movement in the body, for example, and yet it's really hard to get out of bed in the morning. Does it mean that you value that any less? No, but it means that something's getting in the way of you doing that.
So that's kind of at the heart, I guess, of the definition of stuck.
Absolutely. Yeah. Something's getting in the way of us acting in accordance with our values. Yeah.
And in that instance, walk us through how you would workshop that with someone.
Yeah. So, for example, a really great little tool actually that I will often use, and it's based on the work of Tobias Lundgren, and it's called the ACT Bullseye, and it's a really great, very concrete tool that we can use. And it is, as you imagine, it's a bullseye target, and it asks you or invites you to imagine that the middle of, like the bullseye, is you acting 100% consistently with what you value, kind of most of the time. And then as the rings expand, it's like the further out you get from your action being aligned to your values. So sometimes that might be somewhere that we would start, is to kind of map this out. And then we might look at, okay, so if I could see you acting in accordance with your values, what would I see? So we really want to get like a real sense of, if you're walking through today, how would I know that you're acting in accordance with your values? What kind of behaviors would I see you doing? So that might be the next thing. Then we want to have a look at, okay, so what is getting in the way there? And often it's two major things. It's what's called fusion with our thoughts. So kind of like what we were speaking about earlier, Simon, this kind of real attachment to our thoughts, often to be facts. So they drive our behavior. Or avoidance of unpleasant emotion. And that is what is often like this kind of foundation of therapy, is how do I work with the painful emotions so that I can keep heading in the direction of my values?
Right. So fusion with thoughts, we've gone over. That's the idea that, I am my thoughts, which we're not. So creating distance between them and I am having this thought ... So we have this distance. In terms of getting in the way, the second bit that you mentioned there was avoiding pain. And I think this ties into another section in your book and seems related. Part of avoiding pain, I would presume, is often seeking out instant gratification or hedonic pleasures, as you describe in the book. Can you walk us through what the difference is between hedonic pleasure and, is it eudaimonic wellbeing? And how does this tie into this idea of avoiding pain?
So yeah, that's a great question. So if we would, I'm just going to give you an example because I feel like this makes it really concrete. If you think about a task that you have to do, let's just say there's a deadline for something. And when this deadline is approaching, the thought is, okay, I've got to do the work. Now, what comes with that might be a whole host of unpleasant experiences. So it might be like, it could be something like boredom. This is going to be really boring. I don't really want to do it. It might be actually anxiety, like I'm feeling anxious about it because I don't know what I'm doing. It might be irritation. So a whole host of unpleasant emotions. So when you think about sitting down to do this work now, here is this discomfort. Now, when this discomfort is there, we're like, I want to get rid of it. This is not comfortable. I don't like it. I don't want it to be here. So we put off the task till tomorrow. Now, in that moment there, we might put it off by going and doing something pleasurable, for example. But in essence, it's avoidance. So we're avoiding the discomfort. And what comes with that, and this is what's so reinforcing about avoidance, is that in the short term, that discomfort is gone. And we're like, phew, don't have to do that now. I'm going to go out with my mates, or I'm going to go and scroll on my phone or watch TV or something. So whatever that choice of behavior is allowing us to avoid this discomfort of doing the task. But the problem is that the next day we now have less time. And so now I'm feeling more anxious. And now I've put myself under more pressure. And so the feelings actually get bigger. This discomfort is now bigger today than it was yesterday. And here we see this like reinforcing, like this self-perpetuating reinforcing cycle of avoidance. That the more I avoid, the more suffering I will experience. And so how that ties into like hedonic pleasure, it's a bit tricky because, we all, hedonic pleasure is basically like experiencing the pleasurable things in life. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We know that, it's absolutely normal and understandable to go and enjoy like a pleasant meal or to enjoy a sunset or to enjoy looking at art. But if we only strive for those experiences, we will often come up short because we're so avoidant of the unpleasant emotions. Now, eudaimonic happiness really is around the notion of the good life, and the good life is a life that's meaningful and purposeful. And this is based upon ancient Greek philosophy, which I won't go into here, but it's really this idea that a life worth living will be hard and it will bring pain, but it will be characterized by, in essence, by living by our purpose, living by our values. And pain is unfortunately a very big part of that.
I've had a bunch of friends ask me recently, Simon, do you actually rate 8 sleep? So here's the truth. I would not promote 8 sleep if it hadn't genuinely helped me. It has literally transformed my sleep. Since adding the Pod 4 Ultra and then more recently the Pod 5 Ultra to my bed, I've been waking up feeling fresh, clear-headed, less inflamed in the face and fingers, and ready to take on the day with enthusiasm, rigor, kindness, and patience, all good things. That's what a proper night of recovery does. It literally makes me a better human. The Pod 5 isn't a mattress. It's a high-tech cover that fits over your existing bed. It personalizes the temperature on each side, tracks your sleep stages, and even detects snoring, gently adjusting your position to help stop it. And now with the new Pod blanket, that same intelligent temperature control extends across your entire body. It's like sleeping in a cocoon that actively helps you recover. This is hands down one of the best investments I've ever made for my health. Head to 8sleep.com/theproof and use the code THEPROOF to get $350 off your Pod 5 Ultra. And you've got 30 days to try it. And if you don't like it, which I can't see happening, send it back for a full refund. Shipping to many countries worldwide. See details at 8sleep.com/theproof. Yeah, I was laughing when you were talking about the not doing the work and seeking some type of pleasure, because for me, avoidance can actually show up as doing more work. So if there's a tough conversation to have around home, I might find myself working extra hours and avoiding that conversation. And I was joking with my mates, this week we were talking about one of my friends, and he said to me, my partner's bringing up things from 3 years ago. And we had a chuckle because we're like, yeah, well, that's what happens when we avoid the hard conversations. they resurface 3 years later. So that's on us, buddy.
Yeah, we're so busy working. And it's so interesting because the mind can be so sneaky like that that you can kind of convince yourself that I'm here doing the work. I'm here doing this other thing. But actually, it's just sneakily disguised avoidance, because approaching that thing brings with it really, really unpleasant feelings, and we don't like that.
A few quick questions that someone could ask themselves to determine if they're living in alignment with their values or not.
Yeah. I think the question that would always show up to me would be something around, if I was to fast forward 10 years, how would I feel about how I'm living at the moment? That I think that can be, or even if I fast forward a year, how would I feel about that? So it's again kind of trying to gain a perspective on, with some distance around how is it that I'm living? We can also go the other way, so we can go back to the childhood part of ourselves. And this is really, this is really important work, is kind of looking at the younger parts of ourselves. And so a question may be, how would 10-year-old Emily feel about this? What would she say? What would she think? They're really hard questions to ask. On a more simple level or a concrete level, we could just really check in with, how am I going? Just like in this moment here, in this present moment, am I living the life I want to be living?
Which comes back to that awareness piece. So you can get crystal clear on A, what are the values, and B, how am I showing up in my life? Speaking about childhood, we all have histories. And there are things that have hurt us, that have shaped us, that have, made us protective in certain ways, like we've kind of been discussing. In the book, you talk about acceptance. What is acceptance and what isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. I think that this comes up a lot, actually. And I will start off by saying acceptance is not gritting our teeth. And it's not like white knuckling it through something that feels very overwhelming. It's actually quite different from that. And the example that I would give, like actually in the book, I think feels really, I think it feels quite tangible. So an example of acceptance or an experience of acceptance might be something like this. If you go to the dentist, at least this is my experience. When I go to the dentist, I'm lying there, it's an experience that I don't enjoy. Right? Like I put it off, probably far too much avoidance goes on there. And then I'm lying in the chair and I will notice that I'm there and the dentist is doing stuff in my mouth. And I will notice that I'm clenching my fists and tightening my legs. Now that is me getting caught up in the struggle against the pain. In some ways, we could see that as like gripping and white knuckling it, gritting my teeth through this experience. That is the opposite of acceptance. So what we're trying to look at here is this idea that in that moment when I notice that I'm gripping my hands or my legs, is that I let go. Because this gripping of my hands and this tightening of my legs is actually not serving me. It's not protecting me against the pain, even though that's the body's response to it. It's not actually allowing me to sit with the discomfort in my mouth. So when I let go, I've dropped some of the struggle with the pain. The pain is still there, but the struggle with it is gone. Now, I may do that like 10 or 15 times during that visit to the dentist, but every time I let go, I'm now just sitting with the pain rather than getting caught up in a struggle against it. And that's kind of what we're looking at with our emotions, is that, like I've said, that pain is part of us being human. So we will have it. When the pain shows up, so often what we do is that we will bring with it a whole lot of judgment about it being here. So I don't like it. I don't want it. I want it to go away. I can't handle this. This is too much for me. So a lot of judgments around the presence of this pain being here. The work of acceptance is around turning towards this with an attitude of openness and compassion and acknowledging that, yes, you're here right now. What can I let go of here? How can I let this pain be here? And there are a myriad of ways in which I would practice that. But it, metaphorically, it is like letting go of gripping my hands. The pain will still be there, but my relationship to it is changing.
I haven't been in the position where I would say I've experienced a kind of deeply traumatic event, particularly as a kid. So it's difficult for me to relate to that. But I have to imagine that letting go and developing a different relationship to pain can be very hard for people when they have related to that pain for so long in another way.
100%. Yeah. This is really hard and very intentional work. And the in some ways the call to arms here is, how has this way of being, of working with my pain, worked for me or working for me now? And that's kind of bringing in again this kind of values piece in here, and that is that so this way of being with my pain may have served me before and may have got me to a point that I'm okay or I can survive as an adult, but it is actually not serving me in cultivating a life that feels really meaningful. It is very intentional and very hard work, and I really acknowledge that, absolutely. It involves bringing in a lot of compassionate practices. And so self-compassion is, in my opinion, really pivotal in terms of cultivating this accepting stance towards our experience. And that is, again, like it's really hard work, but much like anything, it is a skill that we can practice. And the more that we practice that, the more, like when we're strengthening our muscles, for example, the stronger that muscle becomes, the more readily we can use it.
So developing a relationship where the pain is working for me, not against me.
Yeah, or that the pain is just living alongside me. Because it may genuinely feel like, for example, just thinking about experiences of people that are socially anxious, as an example. So, you go out with your friends and you find that all of these anxious thoughts are showing up. when I'm out there and there's lots of kind of self-conscious thoughts. What are they thinking? I don't have anything to contribute. What are people thinking of me? When that pain is there, it narrows our focus and we lose contact with this present moment. We're not open then to experiencing the joyfulness of being in contact with other people. We can't listen as well. And so those thoughts are really kind of narrowing our experience. And from a compassionate lens, it might look like something like, Emily, I hear you. You're having a really hard time. How can I allow a space here to be kind to myself and then return my attention to the present moment?
I thought that was an interesting part of your book where you spoke about identifying thoughts that are not serving us by thinking about what's on the other side. And I think you spoke about the two sides to a coin.
Yeah, I think that this feels really important actually. So if we think about, for example, particularly in relation to something like social anxiety. So social anxiety would often tell us to avoid social events, just, really, really plainly speaking, that when anxiety is here, it brings with it an urge to withdraw. And it tells us that it's going to be safest for us to be at home, for example. So when that shows up, when you make that decision to withdraw, to stay at home and to not go out, something else happens aside from a reduction in our feelings of anxiety. The other piece that happens is that we move further away from our values. And so what we're looking at here is this idea that if you attempt to get rid of the pain of this anxiety by withdrawing, we also throw away our opportunity for connection. So pain and connection, pain and love are two sides of the same coin. If you want connection, if you want love, what comes with that is the potential for pain. If you throw out pain, if you throw the coin out the window, and now I'm at home and I'm not feeling anxious anymore, we've also thrown out our capacity here for connection and love.
A lot of what we've spoken about today is about interrupting the automatic, the patterns that we're running, the thoughts that we are just accepting without running through any type of filter and thinking about our values and getting any separation from ourselves. What practices do you like or do you recommend to your clients to help build awareness?
There are many ways in which we can practice kind of cultivating this muscle of awareness. For me, I've been very much trained in a mindfulness-based approach. So mindfulness is certainly very foundational in the work that I do. And in essence, it's, again, like this practice of attunement, of being able to notice and to bring a non-judgmental awareness to whatever is happening in our experience. But I will acknowledge that I think the term mindfulness has over time become diluted and at times maybe even misused. And so we may have conceptions around what mindfulness actually is and what its intention is. So I kind of bring this, this caveat when it comes to mindfulness is that we really need to have a strong understanding as to what it is that its purpose is. That it's not about relaxation and it's not about clearing the mind. It's really like a way of living, of approaching living. And that is that we're bringing a mindful awareness, a non-judgmental awareness to this moment as it is. And it's with that awareness that we then now have choice. And that's what's so fundamental. I will note, however, that again, like mindfulness is not for everyone and it's not in all circumstances. And so there are many other avenues in which we could cultivate this kind of a greater attunement. It can be things like somatic practices, whether this is doing something like yoga or tai chi or I can't even say the word qigong. So some practice that is allowing you to tune into the body is a really great place to start. Then there are other practices too, like journaling. And so journaling, I will often use alongside mindfulness as well, the practice of mindfulness. And journaling, I think, can be a really great tool for cultivating this attunement to the self, to this kind of internal workings. But interestingly, and probably with all of these practices, the thing that gets in the way is discomfort. So if I think about sitting down to journal, that may bring up discomfort, and then we put it off to tomorrow. So many people have grand plans. They go and buy out the really beautiful, nice journal, and they might get a really nice pen to go with the whole process. And then it just sits there because discomfort is getting in the way of me turning towards myself. And journaling is this practice of turning towards the self and uncovering what's here. So I will kind of always note that, when you first start out, that it's going to feel uncomfortable and you may put it off and may avoid it. But what would it be like just to write a sentence or two? And that sentence may even start with, and I often say this, I have no idea what I'm going to write. And now we've started.
And then it's just a free flow of thoughts and ideas that you create separation with, much like we've been talking about, that then you may choose to accept and act upon or not.
Yeah. So it can be, the journaling process can be very structured. So you could, really list out all the thoughts that you're having and then seeing if we can stand back and take a different perspective. We can then move into, really being very specific about the workability again. So asking yourself, how does this work for me when I hold tightly to this thought? But on the other hand, it can also be very stream of consciousness. The very act of writing is often what we would consider a practice of diffusion. So diffusion is this kind of sense that I'm separating myself from the thought. And when we're writing, it's actually that we are getting distance in that very way. And with a stream of consciousness, often, it's not always the case, but often we will notice that when you first start writing, the emotions will rise. So these feelings of discomfort or pain may arise. And then, often something very interesting happens is that as you're writing, the more you're writing, we notice that the emotions might reach a peak and then they start to change. And towards the end, often of that journaling experience, we might even just intuitively come to actual problem solving. So what's the action I'm going to take next? That's often this kind of flow of journaling that we will see, or that I certainly see. And I think that can feel empowering, is that towards the end of that process, we're often coming up with, okay, so what am I going to do about it? What do I want to do next? How do I want to take care of myself? How do I want to take care of others? So it's coming to this kind of, again, this action orientation.
At the beginning of this conversation, if I recall correctly, you said to me that one of the, distinguishing characteristics of people who are able to move forward is a willingness to feel. And I mentioned there might be, I'm sure there are, and I can put my hand up, at times it's hard to know what you feel. So particularly if there are men listening thinking, well, where do I start? Is it this way of journaling, or what have you found are the most effective kind of first steps to learn how to express what you're feeling?
So really fundamentally, we need to have a language for emotion. And Brené Brown has done some beautiful research, obviously, in this area, and her book, The Atlas of the Heart, is a great resource, actually, for understanding emotions. And so that's something that I would often point clients in the direction of. But actually, more simply, I would often use what's called an emotions wheel. And this is this idea that we're becoming more emotionally literate. That if I, for example, the example that I would often use, in fact, would be if I know that my kids are sick. So if my child says to me, "Mom, I'm feeling really sick," my next question is, what kind of sick? Because if I only know that they're sick, at best, I can only treat them with pain medicine, for example. But if I know that instead of it being a headache, they've got a cut on their knee, and I now have to dress the knee and clean the knee and put a Band-Aid on, that gives me so much more information to treat it accurately. But if I only know they're sick, I miss out on all this information. And this is the same thing when it comes to our emotion. If I have a very limited range or vocabulary for emotion, I miss out on opportunities, or my opportunities to work with this emotion become much more narrow. So if I only know that I feel bad, that's not going to really help me. But if I knew that actually I feel lonely, now we have some information. So when loneliness is here, so yes, we can begin to work with that emotion, But when that emotion is here, it's functioning as information. And the more information we have, the more choices we get about how we show up next. So to that point, what I would often use, like I said before, is an emotions wheel. And you can Google these. There are many available. But basically, the premise is that it's like the spokes of a wheel. And towards the middle of the wheel, we have our core emotions. And from those core emotions, it moves outwards towards the outer rim of the wheel to become more and more granular or more specific. So we move from sad to lonely or sorrowful or agitated. So we become much more specific about what it is that we're feeling. And now we have an emotional language. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who is I'm going to have to double check this, a neuroscientist and an amazing researcher in the field of emotions, talks very explicitly about the importance of emotional granularity, and that the more granular we can be in our emotional experience and descriptions, the better the outcome. So again, we just need to know some words to start with. We need to actually have the words in front of us often to start to get a sense as to how we feel. And so that's where I would start, actual words and language.
And that's something that as an adult can be improved upon, I'm assuming. I'm assuming it's easier to develop that as a child, but can be done as an adult.
It definitely can be done as an adult. It definitely can. And look, I think our schools are doing such an incredible job of bringing in emotional literacy in the early years of education, so that, you know, kids are getting a real sense that there are a range of emotions, and that these emotions also bring with it feelings in the body. And, you know, as an adult, if you haven't been taught, you know, emotional literacy in some ways, or this kind of more in-depth emotional language, as an adult, what we might need to do also is be able to tune into the body. So the body will often give away or tell us what emotions are present if we're willing to tune into them. So it might be this practice like, okay, so when you're feeling really irritated, how does that show up in the body? And it might be like you're getting like a clenched fist, or you're getting tightness in the chest, or there might be like a radiating heat somewhere. And so now we start to bring in bodily awareness as a pathway or a gateway to understanding emotions. So whenever we feel an emotion, it will always have some kind of somatic or physical response. What comes first is there is a bit of conjecture around that from a neurobiological point of view, but we know that emotions are felt in the body. And so if this body is here and we're not attuned to it, we also miss out on a whole lot of information about our emotions.
Yeah, I know I can personally relate to that. You know, if I'm frustrated or if I'm angry, you know, emotions that I can label, thankfully, but you know, you feel hotter or your heart rate goes up, you know, a little flushed. I'm feeling happy about the emotion wheel.
That's good.
Yeah. You mentioned, and I think this might be a nice place to kind of land the plane here today. You mentioned that often it's easy to start these mindfulness practices and then stop or avoid it because it is difficult. It's uncomfortable. Remind us why it's worth it.
Because you get this one life, right? This is the thing, is that you get this one life. And yeah, pain is going to show up and it's going to get in the way and it's going to be a real struggle. But we get this invitation. We get this invitation to choose how we want to live with this knowledge that one day we will die. And that, to me, like, I know that that's a really big thing when you're in the midst of a lot of struggle. The sort of practicing mindfulness, doing journaling, doing this work feels too much. But it's just those micro steps, you know, just taking one step today, one step forward in the direction of what you value.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. I will link to your book, which is absolutely incredible, and I recommend all listeners get out and grab a copy of that. We'll link to where you can buy that locally in Australia and how you can buy that if you live overseas, and also to all the places that folks can find you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Simon. It's been great.
There you have it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and want to stay up to date with future episodes, be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow on Apple or Spotify. Finally, thank you for showing up and the effort that you're making to take control of your health. I look forward to hanging out with you again in the next episode.